I've never paid much attention to high-profile murder cases. Around 40 people are murdered in this country every single day. All of these are sad situations, some sadder than others, perhaps. But the media wants us to be especially concerned about certain cases and not others. I don't feel obligated to follow their lead on that point or on any other point, frankly. That's why I haven't followed the Gabby Petito case very closely, horrible though it is. And for those who have been similarly out of the loop, just a quick summary. Petito and her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, set out on a cross-country road trip back in early July. They documented their adventures on Instagram and YouTube. Petito made her last Instagram post on August 25th. A week later, Laundrie returned home alone with no explanation as to Gabby's whereabouts. Several days after that, he went missing as well. He was possibly captured on a deer camera footage earlier this week, trekking through the woods of Northwest Florida. Meanwhile, the body recovered in a Wyoming national park a few days ago has now been officially identified as Gabby Petito. Her death has been ruled a homicide, unsurprisingly. Why has this case made national headlines while other missing persons and murder victims are relegated to the local news, if they get any coverage at all? It's not very hard to discern an answer to that. Gabby Petito already had a base of followers on social media who were interested in her life. It makes sense that they would be likewise interested in the circumstances of her death. She was young, attractive, photogenic. The disappearance out in the wilderness, the fiancé on the run, the additional details emerging like puzzle pieces, all of these factors make for a more sensational story. They don't make her death more terrible than anybody else's death. They didn't make her life more valuable or its taking more tragic, but they do add up to a compelling narrative. And it may sound crude to refer to a real-life murder case in that way as a compelling narrative, and it is. But this is how it works in a society where people consume murder cases as entertainment. I mean, true crime, quote unquote, is one of the most popular genres on every streaming service for a reason. Even if in most cases it's only partially true what you get in those documentaries, if true at all. And this is part of the reason why the national media selects and amplifies certain murders and not others. Though recently, prominent members of the national media itself have pointed to a different explanation. Joy Reid of MSNBC echoed the claims made by many on the left when she pegged the Gabby Petito coverage as another instance of, quote-unquote, missing white woman syndrome. Reid, having never encountered a story that she won't racialize, argues that the media and the public only care about white people, white women specifically, who go missing or turn up dead. She charges the media with, quote, ignoring cases involving missing people of color. Let's listen to her.
But the way this story has captivated the nation has many wondering, why not the same media attention when people of color go missing? Well, the answer actually has a name, missing white woman syndrome, the term coined by the late and great Gwen Ifill to describe the media and public fascination with missing white women like Laci Peterson or Natalie Holloway, while ignoring cases involving missing people of color.
We have been sounding the alarm for nearly 14 years because of this. When it comes to missing persons of color, men, women, and children, our cases are not taken seriously, and no one is looking for us if we were to go missing.
Now, if we're going this route, I could just as easily chalk it up to sexism. When's the last time that a missing or dead white man made the national headlines? And if anti-black racism lies at the heart of this, then why do white female alleged murderers tend to captivate the public even more than the murder victims? Casey Anthony, Jodi Arias, Amanda Knox. I can't name a single black female murderer off the top of my head. Is it anti-black racism that leads us to heap extra scrutiny on white murder suspects? And yet still, the basic observation made by Joy Reid and others cannot be denied. Black people are killed or go missing every day at a rate much higher than whites, actually. And none of them, unless they're killed by a cop, we'll go back to that in a second, become household names. Here's a concrete example to illuminate the point. 2 years ago, I talked about this on my show. I've talked about it several times. So you might know about it if you listen to this show, but you won't know about this case if you trust the mainstream media for your news coverage. 2 years ago, a black woman named Brittney Hill was shot and killed by Chicago gang members in broad daylight while holding her 1-year-old daughter in her arms. The footage captured by security cameras is haunting. On the surface, the crime seems to contain all of the elements that would attract widespread media coverage. You have a young woman shot dead in the street. The crime is caught on camera. She dies while laying on top of her child to shield her from the bullets. It's a devastating story and a dramatic story. There are many such stories in Chicago and other cities around the country, but this one is on film. And even in a place like Chicago, it's not every day that a young woman is executed in the middle of the afternoon while holding a baby in her arms. So why didn't the national media show any interest in that event? Why didn't Joy Reid ever mention Brittney Hill's name? The very media that condemns us for allegedly ignoring black deaths is itself guilty of ignoring those same deaths. Indeed, it's entirely their fault that the deaths are ignored. They're the ones who are supposed to be calling attention to news stories. That's their whole job, and they're not doing it. Joy Reid has her own show on MSNBC, a national platform. She could have single-handedly made Brittney Hill a household name. And yet she ignored her death entirely. How can that be explained? And don't tell me she didn't hear about it. I mean, I heard about it. I'm not in the mainstream media, and I heard about it. And I talked about it. Why didn't she? So how do you explain this? Well, I think it's easily explained. The national media disregarded Brittney Hill because Hill was murdered by black men. The vast majority of black female and black male murder victims are killed by black men. That's why Joy Reid and her ilk ignore them, even as they accuse everyone else of ignoring them. They don't want to discuss those deaths because they don't want to talk about the perpetrators who caused the deaths. As it turns out, there are two major factors deciding whether a murder case will appear in national headlines. The identity of the victim matters, but so does the identity of the alleged killer. To pass the media litmus test, the case must be sensational or easily sensationalized, and it must also be politically useful. A white woman murdered by a white man fits that bill. That fits both qualifications, potentially. So does a black man or woman killed by police. That's why those names become household names. Well, yeah, we don't have, there are no household names that come to mind of a black man or woman killed by another black civilian, but we can all name several black people who have been killed by cops. Can you name any white people who have been killed by cops off the top of your head? Again, if you listen to the show, maybe you can, but if you rely on mainstream media, you wouldn't be able to. And what explains that? Again, because it's politically convenient. It's all about the perpetrator. But a black person killed by a black person who's a civilian certainly fails to meet this criteria. And so does a white man killed by anyone of any identity group. I mean, there are circumstances where a dead white woman can become a household name. There are circumstances where a dead black person becomes a household name. There's almost no circumstance where a dead white guy becomes a household name. It doesn't matter how he dies. We're not hearing about it. Now, rare exceptions can be made to that final rule. Every once in a while, a dead white man might provide political fodder to the left, even if they have to lie about the circumstances surrounding his death. See Brian Sicknick for an example. And of course, none of this applies to the dead white men who make the headlines because the media wants to mock their deaths, like the various white conservative radio hosts who have succumbed to COVID. But the common thread tying all of this together and making sense of all of it is the media's steadfast refusal to bring attention to anything that may conflict or at least fails to advance their ideological agenda. If it bleeds, it leads, right? That used to be the motto. We can only long for those cynical yet still simpler times now. Nowadays, it might bleed. If it bleeds, it might lead. Or it might be locked in a vault and buried under the earth. It all depends on who is doing the bleeding and who is responsible for spilling the blood and how it all gels with the political narrative. So Joy Reid is right to call out the media for how it handles these cases. Her mistake was in exempting herself from that criticism. Listen, hit that subscribe button right now. Do it right now. I thank you for your compliance. It is somewhat appreciated.